Upon a certain survey of himself, a man so thought, I began as an open plain, on which became built a mighty city, and I am now a wasteland, an enriched, invigorating, and refreshing wasteland, the likes of which known only to me. One man pursued the secret through a method of attempting to continually shock himself out of his natural state of mental stupor. Then after some years so spent, one day stopped and asked himself, is it even possible to put a shock directly into thinking, or must it be applied someplace else? And just the realization of the question took him to a new level. No one cares what sounds the heart makes as it pumps, nor the lungs as they breathe, nor do any the brain, save the few. There were once two adjoining principalities, the land of content and the land of function, whose relationship routine observers could never figure. If the mind can keep you hypnotized with the smoke and sounds of the battlefield, you'll never get around to noticing the specific nature of the conflict, or indeed if it actually exists. There was once a man who said, I think I want to be in another state of awareness. Then later he said, no, I feel like I want to be. Then later a friend asked him if he had moved even beyond that stage, and he replied, what stage? As they sat around kvetching, one man noted, one thing about complaining, it helps the time go by. And suddenly another man was struck with the realization that complaining is one of the creative components of the sensation of time. Part of the purpose and the sensation of freedom men experience in their mental life is to help distract them from their captivity in other areas. Oh yeah, and it also helps them keep moving. When one man joined the circus, he at first wanted to be a lion tamer, then the dresser for the female acrobats, then the ringmaster, then a clown, then the owner of the show, and finally he just wanted the hell out. A viewer writes, after listening to you for some time now, I no longer care whether what you say you mean metaphorically or literally. Plus, I have concluded on my own that this is progress. A young warrior asked his liege, is to be more conscious, to think more? But his lord would not at that time reply. The true history of heroes. None lived in the past and none in the future. And to be one, you must obliterate the present. Right now exists only for those with no sense of it. The uncontrolled flow of life's energy through a man's brain will forever distract him from the realization of where he is and what he could do at every given moment. Look away, seems to cry out all of man's circumstances. Look away, lest you glimpse more than the norm is set up to see. Topography does not produce the horizon always before man. Life's expansion does. As the pertinent responsibilities, it passes down to first mechanical thought and imagination, then to man's sense of time. Few mental prisons are as effective as time, and thus does the mystical hero have no particular place in which he wants to position himself. So said a father to a son, if you worry, you'll feel helpless. And the boy responded, but feeling helpless now is what causes me to worry. And the old man said, you still don't get it. He said this twice from two different perspectives using two dissimilar tongues in an attempt to give the boy a hint. The guards of city rulers believe arrows fly in only one direction, while the warriors of the mystic are bound by no such restrictions. A universal physician states that man's thinking is a symptom and not a cause of anything. but few patients in this galaxy's waiting room understood what he said. One day a stomach and a brain got into a discussion concerning which came first, the omelet or the opinion. One particular man who had studied on the matter for years finally came to ask himself whether the greatest obstacle to a more stable and focused state of consciousness was complaining or time, although no one he subsequently ever mentioned this to could make any sense of it. More people would become actively involved in the effort to shift their mental sense of awareness to a new place if there was some sort of clothing or physical symbol they could wear that would publicly proclaim such involvement. Only those internally heroic can settle for anonymity, and of course the trick therein being that only those who can do so can achieve heroic stature. The ordinary love myths and legends in that by hearing and dreaming about them they feel somehow relieved of the immediate need to make any comparable efforts. Partway through his journey, a certain warrior, after passing through the place in which he lost the urge to talk, found himself in a land wherein he began to lose his interest in listening. True freedom is not conditional or selective, but freedom from all. Such is the singular possibility of a totally fresh awareness. Everyone can see that the body has its own consciousness and the mind its, but men see themselves as having a consciousness of emotions rather than emotions having their own. The distinction between the publicly religious and the mystical is that the religious believe that they can help you. As he increasingly recognized the mirages of the world, one night, when he perceived the grail to be coming toward him, would immediately ride off in the opposite direction. The true code of the quest is, anything the world can do to assist you is a waste of time. After certain efforts and experience, one man so considered, if the only new things worth knowing come only through your own mind, then what the hell am I doing still listening to my old, known by me to be discredited mind? As they initially undertake a search for the secret, people think, what is it that I will use to look with? Then later they will come to think, in what way will I use the thing I use to look with? And after that comes a period of uncertainty followed by discovery. What ordinary people will listen to, either negative descriptions of how things are now, or how they used to be better, or how they'll undoubtedly get worse in the future. Now, shut up, said one man to his interpretations. Shut up and wake up. Reflecting on something read earlier tonight, one chap pondered, are men conscious of emotions, or emotions conscious of him? Only the earthbound care what tomorrow's weather may be. Mental meteorology. And according to the writing on the bathroom wall at one mystical lodge, you can either think about awakening or awaken about thinking. And so mused one chap, if a certain indifference is part of man's transcendental ascent, exactly to what aspect of his workings is his indifference directed? And consider the significance of this. Only two groups of people never give advice: the enlightened and the dead. One man's thinking finally reached this place. Said it to him, give me any subject and I'll think something new about it. And the man thought, my God, the thing's enlightened. The reason you never find mystics shopping in used clothing stores should be obvious. Most of them have no credit cards. To ordinary minds, the unexpectedness of humor can serve as a momentary low-level episode of alternative perspective. One reason that in extreme mystery schools so little laughter is heard. But having noted that, I will also mention a certain warrior who held as his personal precept, live in silence, smile in same. At the ordinary level, those who don't know ask the questions. But at a place beyond that, the situation reverses itself, and those who do know are the ones who ask them. As per one legend of rumor, since emotions can't speak, they invented man's mind. Life, the consummate liege, looked into one man and said, "My, but you're a busy little kingdom." In the classified ads, the reason you never find mystics looking for roommates is because they ultimately live alone, no matter their physical circumstances. And a young would-be mystic nodded his vigorous agreement, saying, "That's right, hell, I don't even like myself." To which an elder responded, "No, that is not right. He is no mystic at all who feels any way about himself." Freed from the mind's inherent ties to the apparent passing of time, a man no longer enjoys the mob's mechanical sense of excitement, but then must provide his own by the only means known, which is to continue along the lines that freed him in the first place. Only baby Buddhas settle for mere enlightenment. There is no heroic way in which the awakened can die while alive. There was once a traveler who reached the mystical city of Istanbul, and after a short while there thought, "Is this all there is?" And even with the more conscious, all there is whatever you settle for. The difference between the true deep-dyed warrior and the merely apparent soul is that the genuine article will, when faced with nowhere else to go on. Only the mentally comatose and comfortable can dot all of their I's and cross all of their T's. Those on the quest of consciousness are forever doomed to sail with the Dutchman and wander with the Jew, delighted in having no home, forever alive and on the move. Talking again about talk. And pointing out that man would not be where he is without talk. He would not resemble where he is. And there is a closeness between talk and thought, as obvious as it may appear, that is more subtle than is normally perceived. Because from any ordinary view, it could be said, could be repeated just what I said about man's position and where he would be without talk, and it could be made from an ordinary level, an argument be made that that would be as true or more so having to do with thought. Not playing with any forced verbal distinctions, but let me just mention something, sort of as a side to all of this, that if it were possible, you can use your mind enough to do this by now, if you can think of it being possible that man did develop the ability to think, but never that to speak, thought alone would not have carried him to where he is. And obviously, as I've done under different conditions, my own conditions in the past, you could make a all-inclusive historical argument for the absolute necessity for thought, and even describe all that man has apparently achieved coming through his ability to think. But as I said, there's a distinction that is not as obvious that is the fact that had it been possible for man to have developed the ability to think, but never that of speech, things would be quite different than they are now. But past that point, that is easy enough for someone to hear and accept on a theoretical basis for the sake of this discussion. But beyond that, once the ordinary mind would take that as a opening premise, as a working premise, there is a subtlety, or a more subtlety, as some of the British would say, to it. And that is that ordinary minds, when they think about speech, they think of the content. And again, I could certainly take a fairly routine position and say that man's observable progress would not have been possible without the content of what he said being of significance. The obvious being that there would be no technology. Man would still be trying to wire up the first generator. No one could say, well, hand me that wrench over there and I'll get this son of a bitch started. The content, at the most basic level, the content was of importance. Or to get past that kind of humor, if you want to play the caveman horizontal view of evolution, the content of talk was the beginning of civilization. That it helped man be able, for one man to tell his family or his brother, his children, exactly where it was that he found food or water yesterday. So that kind of, speaking of referring to talk, the content of what is said can, at a very basic level, undeniably be seen as being of prime significance. But what I was sort of got to last time, right at the end of all my palaver about saying, was that there is another function of talk that is never realized and is, in fact, of greater importance than the content of what is said. And that is the fact of the function of talk itself. Verbally, I can explain what I said last time again, and if an ordinary ear was listening, the sentence would linguistically make sense, whether they saw any value to the observation or not. But then they could not, the ordinary mind will not be able to accept the idea as any sort of continuing premise. It does not become reality. That is, that the mere act of talk is of greater importance than the content of what is said. This not being a philosophical argument, I'll get to the specific practical uses of it. In all areas wherein, at all times wherein men have been more civilized, or in times that certain men that we might discuss were more civilized, they look at all human conflict, or they look at human conflict as being primarily a conflict of ideas. Whether this has any non-reducible validity is another question that I'm not going into. You understand, being figurative, it's not another question. It's simply not true, but I'm not going into it. That's not what we're pointing at tonight. Once men reach a certain point of civilization, they lose even the patina of talk that they're fighting. They're having conflict, whether it results in actual fighting, but their conflicts arise from instinctive territorial disputes. That once men reach an idea that most of the world is in today, they say that the heart of the human conflict, the basis of the conflict that seems to still be one of the major thorns, one of the major detriments to further progress is the conflict over ideas. I'll repeat one more time. You miss the point if you're going to say, well, that's not true. Especially if you thought you'd heard some of the things I'd point out in the past, because I've already admitted it's not absolutely, irreducibly a correct statement of the fact. But you have to simply look at the obvious. You have to simply look at life as how it is operating presently. And those spokesmen, those leaders of the civilized world, civilized areas of the world, they now will say that we have at least passed the point that we are engaged in conflict simply over territorial disputes, that men are past the point, by and large, that is not the heart of the obstacles to further progress. It is no longer one group of people, one country, one race, one nation staying in continual conflict over water rights, over territorial disputes, over boundary disputes, although they still go on. It is now part of the collective consciousness of civilized man that even though such as that still exists in isolated pockets, that the heart of the conflict now facing humanity, that the next obstacle over which civilized men must come, diagram that sentence, over which, I'm glad Winston Churchill is not alive, that which to hear, that too. That they now say, and I'm pointing this out, not they're incorrect, I'm showing you now what life has taken the collective consciousness of man to consider as the conflict. It is that of ideas. It is said that now the greater danger facing humanity that could bring about civilization's downfall and destruction of the planet and etc. are conflicts over ideas, philosophies, theologies, political, economic models. That absolutely denies what I have already said, that the collective intelligence, the collective consciousness of humanity, the world leaders, the sophisticated thinkers, the social philosophers, the economic modelists, say that the ideas, the conflicting ideas between men, are the greatest obstacle that now must be overcome. So what they're saying is, when you say that ideas are important, then you are saying the content of what men speak is of importance. In this case, there is now the general belief of civilized men. It's not just of great importance, it is of importance on the level of life or death for humanity. No one gives any thought, not collectively, not in any large scale, to the matter, to the function of talk, not the content of talk. Last time I had set it up, toward the end of the last taping, I was using an example of listening to people speak, and I was using examples of a fictitious religious discussion, a round table of religious people, all the way from, to make it easy, in one example, all the way from the extreme end of the so-called fundamentalist of whatever religious stripe, into the areas of theologians, theologians of a philosophical nature, the full spectrum of men who say that there is some importance to religion. And I was using that specific example while noting that there would be plenty of others, political discussions, any kind of discussion. And I was pointing out that from their own basis, from the assumed basis of intelligent, sane, civilized people as to the importance of ideas in human speech, that if you listen to people in the religious context, but I repeat, it's certainly not limited. I just picked it out as one example. You listen to them talk about, well, here's what God wants, or here's, and they quote the Bible or the Koran, whatever it is, and if you listen, and you could do it with a totally objective, otherworldly view, it's insane, or better yet, it's inane. It's just nonsense by their own definition, by their own premises. It's nonsense. But that's sort of where we cut off last time when the taping ran out. That is still not the point, because it is more subtle than that. It is not simply that what they're saying is rhetorical foolishness, verbal inanity based upon their own rhetorical premises. What is really at stake, or what is really at question, if you had the ability to be that cold-blooded, that objective, is you listen, and whether it was based upon religious grounds, or if it was in a political context, or economic context, or social context, what you're hearing behind what I described first off is the insanity of it all, the foolishness of it all, of people saying when their house is flattened by a tornado and they all get out alive, as good as, you know, it's just great to be a Christian, to know that God's looking after you. It's not just that. It's not that just the idea is foolish, that the God's let a tornado come through and destroy everything you own, except they let you get out with your diaper and your bathrobe on and spared your life, and then you say, well, phew, it is indeed a great privilege and an honor and a benefit to be a child of God and to see that He will look after you in this manner. And there they stand before the camera in their underwear, and behind them the homestead flattened. All right. That's easy to see. It's why I start off that example. But that is still not what I'm pointing at. What you should be able to hear. I say you should be able to hear. If you can develop an alien view, which is simply an expanded state of awareness mentally, the foolishness of it, or what I intend behind the words foolish, inane, insane, meaningless, is this. You listen, and their speech contains not one iota of understanding, perception. Well, understanding covers it. You understand? Do you hear? I am not speaking. So I have to go back and let me pick up my crude example of the man thanking God for sparing his life. How God looked after his own by them getting out of their destroyed house after the tornado hit, he and his family with their life. It is not simply that that's insane, and it's not, what I'm trying to get you to see is whether that is true or not is not the point. It's not to say, well, there can't be a God, because how can you say that you're thanking God for sparing your life from the tornado, then when God's in charge of tornadoes, what's wrong with you, sir? You're an idiot. It's not that. Or it's to say, well, there certainly can't be a God. You are crazy, because you're saying that by you being a Christian or a Jew or a Buddhist, by you being religious, that when God sent this tornado down and killed all the people around you and destroyed your house, it decided to let you live. Therefore, what you're calling God has got to be imagination. There is no God. That's not what I'm pointing at. It doesn't matter whether there's a God, as they say what it is. Nothing matters in the content of what the man said. I'm not saying there's no God, if I have to make it simple. I'm not saying that, I'm not making a comment about that. When I say I'm not, what I'm trying to get you to do is to be able to have a view that is absolutely sang-froid, that is absolutely indifferent, disinterested in any of the content. You have no prejudice, you have no feeling, you have no interest in the content of what the man said. Now, but still it's foolish at the level at which you said it. But beyond that, what I am pointing at is if you listen to it, it doesn't matter. Let's say a God does exist. Let's say that God exists more or less like he's describing. However he imagines, let's say just God exists like most people believe. Let's say that. The man has no idea at all whether that's true. And I'm not speaking, I'm now not, if I have to keep doing this, I'm now not attacking the idea of faith. Which then I guess some Christian could have jumped in and go, well, hey, that's where faith comes in. All right, we can start that. And man could describe, and I say, well, what's faith? And he says, well, faith, whatever the Christian version is, trust in things unseen or something like that. That you have, that you trust that certain things are true even though they can't be known. There's some definition like that. So if I let him do that and I say, all right, describe faith, and he does that to me. Then if you had the ability to do what I'm saying mentally, I'd punch you and say, listen again. Because he doesn't have any idea what he's talking about when he describes faith. it gets to this point. You can simply hear what I'm pointing at, that it is not critical, it is not anyone's opinion, it's not a criticism, it's not a fault finding, it's not a naysaying of any of the content of what people are saying. It's simply you listen, and whatever it is they're saying, the content of what they're saying is not the point. That's not why they're saying it. And it doesn't matter whether they say, well, it's my opinion, or if they say, well, I can tell you one thing without fear of contradiction. I can tell you one thing I know for a fact. And you listen, and all of it is meaningless. There is no person in the speaker who understands at all, forget faith or guess, or just because he says, well, this is my supposition. An ordinary man might as well say, this is my ironclad knowledge. It doesn't matter. All you got to do is listen, and there is a certain tone to it. It is one reason, as I point out, that people, besides a more basic level of instinctive communication between animals, beyond that, as I threw in a news item last time, this kind of passion that people put into their speech. And, now, again, beyond the kind of animal communication that would go on, such as somebody's about to whip your ass or something, their nose begins to flare and their eyes get wide. This kind of stuff, of people going, you know, if you just watch people talk or turn off TV and do it at home and listen to, you know, somebody up there talking in a suit and they go, and you look at it, and if you didn't know, you'd think, what in the hell is that? I mean, what's he trying to flag in? You know, what kind of, upon what sort of strange battleship is this man standing? And to what, unbelievably, alien craft is he trying to motion? You know, what's he? That and the normal change of voice, the passion that's in people's normal speech, all of that is as hollow as what people are saying, as the content of what they're saying. And I'm simply going to point out there is no satori point to this, but that is one of the reasons that men do speak with a certain kind of passion. And the more that they are addressing a large crowd, the greater is their audience for their speech, such as in person or someone on television or on stage or in the movies. It's just a known fact. You're so used to it you don't notice, but the more passion, the less they would speak in a monotone, which is what, from one view, and I don't mean this about me personally, but anyone doing this, I should be just speaking in a monotone. And for those of you that do like gossip, some of you know it, I have, in fact, once tried that for a while. No gestures. In fact, it might be the extreme way in which I did it once was to sit in a chair, cross your legs, hold your hands, and say just what the kind of things I'm talking about tonight, and for an hour speak with almost no passion. None of the little ups and downs. Just when I say a monotone, you know what that is. It's like hitting one note on the piano over and over and you just talk at that same pitch. Seems to be absolute no passion in what you're doing. Because from one sense, it offers greater opportunity, also greater challenge for the person to consider, in this sense, the content of what's being said, as opposed to what I'm pointing out tonight. Because that's what any useful information should be based on. It's not that you're being entertained by me or someone else. That the content is all it amounts to. If that is not true, then you're dealing with, to some degree, what's normally referred to as a cult or a would-be cult leader, somebody with their own agenda, someone trying to prove something, someone trying to win you over to something. And as I pointed out, and will do so freely again, the kind of thing known as the mystical or the secret not only does not try to win over and convert anybody or win you over, it can't be done, and etc. But certainly anyone who knows it has no delusion that they're going to win people over, or that by the force of my personality, by my delivery, I will in some way win them over, make people see the validity. I will trick people into seeing the truth. At any rate, I'm just going to say this is based upon not for any sort of gossip about the activity, but if you're following what I'm saying, it would have, I took the opposite direction, attempted that. I will cover my ass and say with no great hope, no great expectations, but I did try it and it had about the imagined effect. So, what I want you to consider though is anytime you're addressing more than one person, and I don't mean me, but anytime an ordinary person is addressing, the more people they're addressing, the more it gets into that which I'm pointing out to you is actually a compensation for the lack of anything to say. That's why the bigger the speaker, the bigger his audience, the more a person will do so and so. And if they can't do it, politics is the prime example. This pops up continually. It's nothing that unusual that political observers or analysts or sometimes other politicians will sit right next to a man, some congressman, two senators being interviewed or something. One will point out, well, my good friend here, Senator Fred Jones, has got to be one of the better minds. We all know this in the Senate. But we also know, and so does Fred, you know, there's been much talk over the last 8 or 10 years about him running for the nomination, the presidential nomination of our party. But Fred, now he sat next to him, they're smiling. He said, but as Fred will be the first to admit, he is not the most charismatic speaker in the world. And you'll hear little chuckles around the studio, and Fred will. And if you'd ever seen him speak, you know. He gets up and tries to make a great speech, and it doesn't go. And they know that this is an insurmountable obstacle if a man cannot. They will even say, well, he gets up and it sounds like he's some frightened fifth grader reading a book report. That he doesn't fire up the crowd. And the camera will get to Senator Jones and he'll smile like, well, this is fact. Back to the main course. Human speech as a function exists alone as a function, not as a conveyance of information. And getting to the promised practical aspects of this. Once you can hear that, there's no way to study it, there's no way to analyze it, and you see the delicate nature of me trying to describe it at all. You have to dance all around it, sideways, slip up on it, because even you trying to describe that speech has no, that the importance of speech normally is not its content, then you're faced with the fact, your mind is, that you're listening to the content of what I'm saying, attacking the normal perception of the importance of the content of what people say. Even though I'm sure you do not sit around, I hope, and analyze things in that manner, your mind is still aware of it, and your mind tends to go, screw that stuff. Because what it's making the mind do, or the mind understands the possibility, or thinking does, that if it followed that along, what I'm saying, that it would suddenly be faced with going up and being confronted with itself. And thought, neither thought nor talk has that in mind. You ever notice how common it is for people, if they do not do it for a living and have some way become rather immune to it, how everyone, just almost everyone, when they first the first few times hear their voice on tape, go, ooh, I can't stand that. And they use a thought if like, ooh, I've got such a terrible accent, or I just don't like my voice. I suggest you there's something else. If you ask them, they'd say, what's my tone of voice? I sound too southern. I got too much of a Brooklynese accent. I've got too much of that Midwestern. They'll say something, but I'm suggesting to you, hint, hint, that's not why people don't like their voice. No. But you could go around polling humanity and you'd get through at least down there 6 billion people before you would ever find anyone who might say anything resembling the real reason that humans do not like the sound of their own voice. The first 6 billion people, before you got to me and a few other people I know, and of course we'd lie to you, so the whole point's moot, but at least you go through 6 billion people that would tell you that they physically, what they're saying is they physically do not like the sound of their voice. They don't like the tone of their voice. They do not like the monotony of their speech. They don't like the way they'll say, the 6 billion people will tell you all of that. But I hint to you that's not the reason. Back again to the practical uses. If you can hear on your own, which you've got to do, there's no way to force it, that you can simply hear on your own, that you can divorce your own consciousness from the own faucet of energy running through your brain naturally, and you listen to human speech of all stripes, certainly not limited to any example I made, and you just listen to people talk, you hear that the content of what they're saying is baseless. It is meaningless. Or if you can hear it without being criticism, the best way to actually verbally put it to someone who can hear a little bit is, people talk about things of which they have no understanding. All right? Of which they have no understanding. Except it's not even worthy of that. Because that, that, ordinary minds would jump from that to say, well, what you mean is that people lie a lot. Ordinary people are not even capable of lying at any meaningful level. They're not. Well, sure, a man can say, somebody comes out in the parking lot and said, who banged in my car and you did it? He can certainly say, no, it wasn't me. But that's meaningless. When it comes to lying, the ordinary mind is incapable of it. And I'm not going into that tonight. I'd like to. I promise to get to somewhere else. Once you can hear that what people say, they have no understanding of. I hope you get the point. I can say other things that they don't listen. That's a known fact. And nobody runs with that. They're not supposed to. But if you ask somebody, they just got through making a fine comment. I mean, they say something that was intellectually profound to you. Men standing around a crowd at the water cooler, they go, blah, 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 something about the kinds of political disturbances going on now in Bosnia or Northern Ireland, and he'll say, well, here, the kind of history was a political conflict that arose from blah, 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 and you listen, and you never thought about it that way. And 2 minutes later, they breaks over, and he goes back to his desk, and you pass him, you go, maybe I missed part, but you were saying, when you said the original conflict between the Serbs and the Croats, did you say the Croats, that they were the ones that, and if you look, you suddenly realize, or you get through your question, he goes, and he has to change the subject, because 2 minutes later, he does not know what he said. That's not an attack on people, but that's a known fact that, well, it's a known fact you can point out to people, even the person doing it. And I say it's a known fact. It's like Alka-Seltzer through a duck. And they take it as an insult. If you ask him the question, he goes, and if you keep on, and if you were an ordinary person, finally said, wait a minute, I thought you were saying, you mean you don't even know what you said 2 minutes ago when you had us all there in rapt attention? He would take that as the mind ordinarily does, it's supposed to, then he would finally take it as an attack on him and go, well, hey, leave me alone. I wasn't talking to you anyway. What the hell do you know about history? But the point being, simply this, he did not listen to what he said. That's not fault finding, that's not criticism of men. They don't need to. It's not important. And why? Well, I've already said why, but I'll say it again. Because what they're saying is of no importance. It's not of any importance to them. There he stood. Since I did it, how about back to this? You can all understand that. Around the water cooler at break, and a guy gives a little 1 minute dissertation on some subject or other that's been under discussion. This seems to have some philosophical basis to it. In other words, they're not discussing the Super Bowl, but they're discussing something that seems to be in the world of ideas. And he stands over to his little audience there. They're standing just for a second. And he goes, blah, 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 da, 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 da. And all the people, including, let's say yourself, you're listening like, well, I never thought of that. It's not going to change your life, but it is intellectually stimulating and interesting at that moment. He goes, da, 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 but da, and da, 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 and but da, 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 and what have we got today? Then they all realize it's time to go back to work. And you ask him, a minute later, something specific about what he just said that impressed you. He impressed you. And he cannot recall what he said. Ordinary people would take that as being some sort of observation on my part, some criticism of the psychological flabbiness of men or some such. It's not that. It happens all the time. And you all know it. If you got any ability to use your brain for something other than what most people do with it, you do it. Everybody does it at that level. Why? What's afoot? Why do not men get better? Why is it not important? But if you can see the obvious, if all this having any effect on you, and you get past the point, such as this example, to say, well, he wasn't listening. I mean, it's some sort of fraud. Maybe he just memorized that. Maybe it's something he just read in the Wall Street Journal this morning, and he just kind of repeating it, and therefore when you call his hand or you go back and ask for additional information, he can't tell you anything because he didn't really know what he's talking about. Where did I just hear that? That goes on all the time, but then the obvious that you should then ask yourself, when I was saying one way to use the mind, a couple of nights ago I wrote you a news item, if you didn't catch it, that said when you're thinking to get to this point that you can look at something, anything, and go, well, it's not exactly like this, and it's not exactly like that, you're beginning to push the frontiers of thinking's ability. That's what this sort of thing is. But you have got to be able to free yourself from any criticism. You've got to free yourself from hearing your own thoughts. Go, well, wait a minute. Look at people. Look at what just happened to me. I talked to that guy, asked him a question, and he couldn't answer it. You know what that tells me? He was standing there talking about something, and he wasn't even listening. And then you might think, hey, I'm getting smart. That means he couldn't have really known much of what he was talking about. He couldn't have had any depth of understanding. He was in some way just parroting something. He had heard it. He was not. If he wasn't listening, if he can't remember what he said a minute ago, then that tells me, that there was no great depth of understanding. Depth of understanding? There's none. But then, if you can get past that point, that you do not let your mind take it as being, well, that just shows that you can't have any, you can't trust him. Or it just shows that some people don't listen to what they say. That's to think, well, it's exactly like this or it's exactly like that. If you can keep from doing that, then you should be able to move on and say, all right, that goes on all the time and I know it. You don't have to listen to me point that out. It goes on continually. Chances are you have been caught at it. That somebody went, what? And you went, what? They go, what did you just say? You go, about what? Well, you just said, you were talking about so-and-so. And you go, we got to get back to work. I'll tell you later. And, of course, you've tried not to realize it, but you should realize that you do it. Then the question, if you can get past it being listen even to yourself, say it, and then you hear it go, yeah. And you listen to yourself criticize humanity, and you take that as being some useful conclusion. Well, hey, people don't listen sometimes to what they say. Hardly ever do they listen in the sense that what they're saying comes from any understanding on their part. But then, what you should get past and get to the next stage is, well, wait a minute, people keep doing it, it doesn't change and it doesn't harm anything. What's afoot? That means something else is going on, and it's got to be right before your eyes. Well, I say that. It is right before your eyes. Where are they going to hide it? They can't hide being caught. They can't hide when you say, well, what did you just say about so-and-so? And there's nowhere to hide other than, hey, I got to go. That is, they mentally cannot hide because their lack of understanding, their lack of listening to themselves is right there in the open for anybody to see. Okay? So then the cause of it, or what purpose it's serving that's not readily observable, is also got to be there. You understand? Because if they could hide anything, they would hide what they're doing that people do observe, such as, wait a minute, you just talked about something that seemed to be important, and now, a minute later, you can't remember what you said. All right, they can't hide that. So if they can't hide that, then whatever else is afoot, they sure as hell can't hide. So don't let your mind say, well, it could be some sort of unconscious stirrings within the man that makes him sometimes get out in public and, speak over his head. If he can't hide that by which he is caught, then he sure as hell can't hide that which motivates him. It is not hidden. It is more out in the open. So what you should be observing is simply this, that men talk about things they do not understand. It doesn't seem to matter. Why? because it doesn't matter. That is not why they're talking. Once you understand that, once you can hear it, then the idea that human conflict is based upon ideas, or the more we progress, and the more each individual man evolves, then the more is his sense, the more is his seat of conflict with other humans, that of ideas. Because civilized men, the faculty at Princeton do not, there is no record, and I keep up with such things, there is no records of any of the Friday tea parties resulting in physical fisticuffs between faculty members. More so than that. Well, that you probably knew that. Some of you checked that. But here it is also. There are no passionate arguments, no record of any passionate arguments arising. Verbal arguments. Now, not fisticuffs. No verbal arguments arising over non-mental matters. There are no records of the faculty of Princeton at the weekly Friday afternoon tea party getting in verbal arguments over physical matters. You understand? No loud arguments over one professor arguing with another professor over the inherent strength of the Cowboys over the Steelers. Or over a Dodge over a Ford. You understand? Their whole sense of conflict, if there be any, is the world of ideas that is presented culturally, artistically, in the movies and everywhere else. That is, if anything else, if they're trying to show that a group, you know how they try to establish a quick mood to get the plot of a movie going, let us say, and they'll first show a group of people standing around. Of course, they're dressed in the background of where they are, the environment, the library where they're all having drinks, but they will show them right quick. They'll be discussing matters far beyond the interest of the audience themselves. They'll be discussing matters about economic policies, just for a few seconds before the ordinary movie audience goes to sleep or throws things at the screen. But they get the gist. The ordinary mind gets the gist of, oh, those are higher class people, more so than me. That's the whole point of this. Their whole area, the whole basis of any sense they have of conflict is in ideas. But once you understand that there are no exceptions to this is the basis of it, that their expression, that the speech itself, not the expression of some idea that another man has objection to, the content has nothing, that is not the purpose. Speech is the purpose. Once you understand that, then, I know you may have doubted I was getting anywhere, then you realize the whole idea of conflict is as vacuous as what they say. In other words, to say, well, the only reason that we're in conflict is over ideas. That's not true. That doesn't mean that they will not, in fact, still believe it, and in fact express conflict, and in fact rattle their swords and atomic warheads at one another, and saying, by God, if you people do not turn, if you tyrants, if you communists don't turn loose and let the socialists in there, as if you're good socialist neighbors, we may come in there and see to it. That doesn't mean that they may not actually come to blows. But insofar as you believing, like everyone else does now, all civilized men, that the basis of it, if they do in fact end up in armed conflict, the basis of it was over damn ideas, and we've got to go past that. You don't have to go past it. It doesn't even exist. Once you hear what speech is, then the whole idea that there is conflict brought about by the conflict of ideas is meaningless. But here is the real useful part. Once you can do that, once you realize that, then you can realize, or you experience, you can do this. You then lose the interest in listening to you talk about all your criticisms, all the things you hear in the world, all the inane ideas, the insane ideas, and I mean, you continually comment on it. What's the mind for if not to make value judgments, it's to make enlightened judgments. It's to be able to identify foolishness, insanity when I hear it. You never heard it. Or put another way, that's all you have heard. How are you going to be selective? Well, wait a minute. That your mind tells you, your thinking tells you, you hear somebody go, well, God must have loved me because when the tornado killed all my neighbors and the minister and blew down the church and my house, he spared me and my family. And your mind says, that's insane. Maybe, but no more insane than you going, well, that's insane. Well, sure, it's insane, if you don't call it that. Whatever you called, you placing importance on what they said, whatever you call it, whatever your criticism, inane, meaningless, stupid, your observation was the same. And once you realize that, not just in other people, once you realize that your mind, pick out that your mind, what it says, except you take it as being, since everyone who is normal and sane, as far as you're concerned, when it gets down to really personal, important matters, your mind, your thinking, is the smartest thinking in the world. Oh, you'll admit that somebody else knows more about science or physics, but your mind is smart enough to know it, and will go seek their advice. But once you realize that your mind is continually doing the same thing, that your mind is staying in front of your camera going, well, God must have loved me because when it... and you realize that your thinking as the normal faucet is opened up and life's energy flows through man's brain, what you're thinking is the same basis. It has no more validity. It has no more understanding of what it's saying to you. You take it as your thinking. But it has no more understanding than it does the most obscene, foolish example I could make up, or you can think of a guy going, well, God must have loved me because when it blew down the church and killed the minister and everybody else, he spared me. In your mind, you just never think about it. Your mind tells you, or it just says, and you think it's you, those people are crazy. They have no idea what they're talking about. But. Do you realize what that frees you from? It brings about a great silence and stillness on a certain landscape. A feat which, to those who have striven for it, or for the few, a feat which a few find absolutely delicious. Thank you.